right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Peyton Lindley. I'm from EffectiveUI, and I am here with my client, Suzanne Hamill, and Chris Whitlock from Fidelity Investments. And we're here to talk a little bit about relationships and how they relate to creating great customer experiences. So just curious, just a show of hands, how many of you guys sit on the agency side? Okay, and how many of you on the client side? Great, okay. So a lot of what we're going to talk about here today is really the nature of the client-agency relationship and how it's morphing. And some really interesting, we've been engaged with Fidelity for about a year now and learned a ton with them, and we feel like we have a pretty great partnership, and so we wanted to kind of talk through what's transpired over the last year and what we'd like to bring back to you today.
Okay. So I'm Susie from Fidelity, and just to give a little context, Fidelity Investments is one of the largest diversified financial institutions in the world. We offer solutions for individual investors, as well as brokers and advisors and employers. And what we're going to talk to you about today is some of the work that we've been doing with Effective for our employer, our customers who are employers. So how many of you in the room have a 401k? And how many of you guys have a Fidelity 401k? Okay, all right, great, okay, great. So we have a business within Fidelity where we offer 401ks to companies, which they in turn offer to their employees. And there are people that work at these companies who have to administer those benefits in those 401ks, make sure that everything is clear. We have a workstation that we are reinventing this year to bring it into kind of the next generation of the workstation. And we've partnered with EffectiveUI on this. And we're actually partnering with a lot of firms across the US because Fidelity is making a huge investment in customer experience and how we can differentiate on customer experience. And what we're learning and working with Effective is just how making sure that you have a great relationship, a working relationship really translates into a great customer experience.
And my name is Chris Whitlock, and why I'm here is, and what I've been doing with EffectiveUI is making sure that in their agency relationship, we expect great creative. That was part of the initial process, the initial engagement. But beyond that is that we realize that because this is over a long haul and it's a very complicated organization, that then really working on developing the relationship with all of the team members is critical to that. So I spent a fair amount of time actually out in Denver with the team, helping them bring them up to speed and sort of describing the landscape that they're about to work in.
So let's just flash back to 2008. Feels like a long time ago to me. And looking at, this is not a new conversation. There's actually a Forrester report here making the web design agency relationship work, and I think you could just as easily reframe it and say making the client agency relationship work. And while certainly a web design agency feels like a bit of an outdated term to me, I think that some of the tenets and concepts in the report still hold true today. Excuse me. So what the report talks about is just sort of this general disconnect of agencies coming in, having a grand vision of where things should lead, and then when reality transpires, the experience is very different. How many of you have had that sort of disconnect, whether on the client or the agency side? Okay, so looks like Susie said that too. And so really the key point to this report is that it sort of distills down three core areas that need to be focused on. One is just communication, open, honest, and transparent communication. Second is process, having a shared and open understanding of process and how work gets done. Oftentimes we find that the agency method or process that we bring to our clients might not necessarily be the way that our clients get work done. And so it's important for us to be very explicit about how we get work done. And it's important for us to listen to our clients in terms of how they want to get work done. And then lastly, having a shared strategic vision is really the key point of getting together. Oftentimes it's too easy to dive into the weeds, get work done, talk about milestones and deliverables, and forget to put the work in a larger context. And Fidelity's done a really great job of, Susie mentioned the project that we're working on. It actually sits in a much larger ecosystem of products. And so, it's important to give context and meaning to our design team and the folks that work on the Fidelity team, which is, where does this work sit in a larger context and why is it important to us as a team? So let's just focus a little bit on the term relationship to begin with. Really, the key point here is focusing on the notion of behavior. So if you look at the way that organizations or people are behaving towards each other, it's focusing on how work is getting done, as opposed to what work is getting done. And so when Susie and I started to talk about what we wanted to share with you today, we started to explore the notion of what is an appropriate analogy for this relationship, and how do we want to talk about ourselves in the world? And so, we started to ask, is this like dating? Is this sort of a Match.com kind of thing where we go through the RFP process and we court each other? Is this more like the Brady Bunch, where we're sort of like, an arranged family, and we've got to sort of work through our constructs and differences in terms of how we interact with each other? And one of the things that Susie and I have been talking a lot about of late is really just the importance of values and shared values, and actually explicitly articulating what those values are and sensing where those things map up.
And certainly there is a part of this where it is a Match.com situation. We put out RFPs, we have agencies come in and pitch work, and we do want them to come in and kind of be that hot agency. But more important is that we have a company that can come in and immediately demonstrate that they have the same shared values. So when EffectiveUI came in to us, they shared with us our work, and I actually wasn't even at that pitch, but they shared with us their work, but then everybody was buzzing because they said, the Effective guys came in, and not only did they share their work, they're showing us how their HR people are using our product, and did a deep dive into the product and showed us immediately right off the bat how we could be improving the customer experience. And it triggered for us immediately, okay, these guys get our values. They're not coming in just to sell us on all the great kind of commercial work that they've done for consumers. They're really digging deep into the problem.
So let's just talk briefly about what is the cost of a bad relationship. Why talk about relationships at all? I imagine that a number of you here in the room have had a scenario where you've invested a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money into a relationship, and the end result was that the relationship didn't work out so well, and consequently the work product was fairly weak. And that has a huge ripple effect across the organization as well as with your end customer. So really, in the spirit of transparency here, our relationship with Fidelity got off to a rocky start. We did exactly what I just described, which is that we went through the process, we pitched, and we dove right into the work. And there was a series of miscommunications. There was never really an explicit moment of, well, how do you work, and how do we work, and what are your expectations, and how do we work through this together? And so, I got sort of the dreaded email from the client. It was a very succinct 2-line email that was, I think some things aren't going very well. How soon can you get on a plane? And I got that email from Susie probably about, 7-8 months ago.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, the dreaded part of my job is sending out some of those emails, because I get an email from someone else saying, get on that plane and get whoever needs to be there. So, what I find with a lot of agencies that we work with and people that you work with, as soon as there's a problem, there's cover your tracks, make sure that everything is okay, and make sure we set up a framework, and there's nothing wrong here, no one's at fault from our organization. And I think the difference with EffectiveUI and working with them was that I sent out that email, and when I send out emails, they get the context of it. They know that there's a problem and there's a need to come in and listen. And I have a need for them to be a partner with me to come in and listen to what is the situation and then rectify it. So it's just, I think that whole posture of thinking like, hey, it's a problem that we can solve together, as opposed to I need to cover my, in order to make sure that I get the next gig.
So what transpired in that trip in North Carolina was Susie and I really sitting down and saying, well, what is happening here? Like, what is truly breaking down? And actually going and listening to her team and understanding what their challenges were, and spending some time actively reconstructing how we work together, via whiteboard sessions and meetings and so on, and coming up with maybe a different working model. And so in working together and sort of taking a time out basically and saying, okay, we can either continue to sort of churn down this road or pause for a moment and reconstruct the conversation a little bit. We were able to go back to our internal teams and say, okay, well, we're going to try something different. We're going to reconstruct things. So I think what we did worked because we're all standing here. And I knew that we had turned the corner when one of our lead designers, came to me and said, "Help! My client is texting me." And this is sort of an exchange between Janelle, who is one of the design directors in Raleigh, North Carolina, and one of our design leads, Lindsay Moore. And this really sort of, I think, exemplifies the type of collaboration that we really want to get to. Oftentimes in client-agency relationships, there are preconceived constructs about how and when you're supposed to communicate with a client. We've got a formal meeting set up, we're going to do a presentation, we're going to do it over WebEx, and we're going to be on a conference call. And the nature of the work that we're doing, certainly Fidelity has remote locations, we are a remote partner, and so we make every attempt to look for unconventional methods to communicate with our partners, because we really have to keep the conversation fresh every single day as we move through design iterations.
And these are real text too, like looking at that.
Yes, they are not fake.
It's not fake, this is really how we communicate, and there are lots of exclamation points and, we really love that ability to have that undercurrent going on while there are status reports and official communications.
So really the point to this is stopping and asking yourself, when you go back to the office, how are we working? How are we working internally? How are we working with our partners? In addition to what are we working on and what needs to get done for tomorrow, next week, next month, and so on. So what we wanted to do is, we can talk about our relationship in a vacuum all day long, but I wanted to sort of put this in a bit of a larger context, which is to say, and this is certainly not a new conversation, but the agency model is changing in the context of the way in which digital media continues to proliferate, and it becomes a much more two-way dialogue between a business and its customer. And so what we're going to show you here, just to sort of frame it up and give you a little bit of a snapshot here, is just a clip from Mad Men, where you see sort of the classic agency big idea come in with a pitch, and, well, you'll see how the client reacts to it.
You go to the swimming pool, you go to the beach. Take off your robe, you head into the cabana. There's no other way to slice it. You're getting undressed.
Can I put my feet on this?
Pretend like it's your living room.
What separates a bathing suit from underwear? Cut and the print of the cloth, and some sort of gentleman's agreement. So well built, we can't show you the second floor.
I think that's a little suggestive.
Good. That's what I was going for. A wink, but it's not a leer.
We don't want to wink. I think I explained our product is for modest people.
Modest people want to be stimulated too. This draws them in a way that will make your competitors seem crude and obvious. Plus, they'll be dying to see the suit.
And they'll be dying to see the girl.
And for all we know, she's not even wearing a top.
You'll get them into the store. Isn't that the point?
It's not wholesome. It's not... did I tell you we're a family company?
I think I know what you're looking for. A couple of women bouncing a beach ball, a little girl in front of them building a sandcastle. Your competitors are going to keep killing you because you're too scared of the skin that your two-piece was designed to show off.
Well, it's somehow dirtier not seeing anything.
You need to decide what kind of company you want to be. Comfortable and dead, or risky and possibly rich.
All I know is we don't want that.
Right, so obviously we've come quite a long way since the days of Mad Men, and we could probably spend an entire session deconstructing what just transpired in that moment there. But really our intent here is to sort of open a conversation about, well, where is the model headed? So if you look at sort of the classic Mad Men model, traditional advertising, we've got really a one-way communication, right? So the agency is sort of acting on behalf of the client and sort of pushing messages to its customer. And the model that we're really sort of proposing and talking about here today is much more a co-created model where we're talking about a really tight partnership between a client and an agency, and then looking at the interaction with the customer as much more of a two-way dialogue. And so seeing clients and agencies as communicators and facilitators and interpreters of the customer message in the context of business requirements and technical requirements, and making sure that that voice of the customer stays alive throughout the entire process is really what we're striving for here in our work with Fidelity. So that just talks about, at a high level, sort of the agency model. And so the question then becomes, well, how does the work get done, and what are some of the methods inherent in the internal working of the process? So what we're not proposing here is what we call the black box approach. So at both Fidelity and EffectiveUI, we're big believers in customer insight, going out and doing field research and understanding how people want to use technology and how they think about retirement and all of these sort of behaviors and motivations. And the question is, how do you distill those findings in a meaningful way? Well, what we don't want to do is become academic researchers and go off and do this in a black box and then sort of have this big reveal at the end where everyone's surprised and no one really knows how to take action on these findings. And so the model that we've really come up with and has been very successful in our partnership with Fidelity is a co-created approach, where we're talking about doing customer insight in concert with the client, so they're out in the field with us doing ethnographic research. And then we come up with, obviously timelines, deadlines are always really critical. And so the question is, how do you keep the conversation moving along in a quick and efficient manner? And so we come up with what we call a customer needs framework, which is a really lightweight tool that allows us to prioritize what the customer needs are in the context of changing product requirements as well as longer-term product roadmaps. And then we run a series of what we call co-creation workshops, where people are really brought along for the process, and that's through a cross-functional team of product management and business development and marketing and technologists and creative. And so by the time we get to the end, there are no surprises, and everyone understands what we're trying to achieve in the context of a long-term product vision. So the question is, how do you change the conversation internally in your organization as well as with your customer? It's easy to say, we want to be more customer-centric, we want to create a better customer experience, but how do you think about doing that? So we often think about using this in the context of creating a revolution. And the key focus here is focusing on the change in the way that something works. Asking yourself, have we fundamentally changed the processes, internally, if you will, as well as externally, at a basic operational and infrastructure level to support a better customer experience? Or are we just saying this thing on the surface and doing the same thing all along? So I doubt that we're probably talking about this kind of revolution, which might involve, some violence. We're generally, peaceful designer types, but I think probably what we're talking about more is this type of revolution here, where we're looking at a very different format, a workshop format. And this is a scene of Kelly, one of our business partners at Fidelity.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning I was saying that Fidelity is making a huge investment in customer experience, and we started that journey about, we started a long time ago. But we picked it back up 3 or 4 years ago. We've been working with a lot of different partners, the Stanford D School, EffectiveUI, and lots of different firms. And I think what we know is that it's not about creating a prototype that you can take on the road and show everybody, okay, this is it, it's done. Like, we figured it out, this is how we're going to change the customer experience. We really need to change the organization. So that's where it gets back to kind of a revolution or a movement. What we're trying to do within the company is change the mindset around how do we approach customer experience and how do we work together to make sure that we're making the right decisions and building on the good work. So what gets us excited about about Kelly, is that, and all our different business partners, is what EffectiveUI has been able to do with us is create artifacts like this bullseye diagram, and that are these easy artifacts for business partners, technology partners to take back to their organizations and explain, this is the rationale for what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why this screen looks the way it does. So here's one of another type of simple artifact that builds on the hierarchy of needs, but we're building in some of the key terms that everybody around the organization who talks about the employers can plug into. So we talk about customers who plug and chug. We talk about helping people be proactive and helping people to be strategic. So we've given them a framework to talk about the work that we're doing and why it's important.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here is that when we joined this particular product group, things were already in motion. This is a multi-year engagement, and certainly us coming in and saying, okay, well, we need to rethink all of this is not going to go over very well. And so the intent here is that this is designed to integrate and layer into the existing product roadmap, and really open the space for questions to say, okay, so let's take a look at your product roadmap and understand where there might be some gaps between some business assumptions and what we understood in our customer insight process. So what have we learned? So we want to just give you some key takeaways from what has transpired over the last year. Space matters.
Well, one of the things that was interesting is, in addition to expecting a great creative from an agency, is that we were able to start seeing that it's their process that we also wanted to learn and understand and take into account. And so this is the space that our design worked in at Fidelity. This is our old space. So the thing is, you can't tell them, but there are about 30 people working there. And one of the things is that we've spent a lot of time figuring out how to make our environment more collaborative, more creative, because that's what we do. And we've been working with Stanford D School, but I remember walking into EffectiveUI's office for the first time, and I said, "Oh, this is it. Look at the way these people work. Look at the way they come up with ideas." And it's a lot of it is about the space that they work in. So, looking at their model and how they work, their process, we came back and we said, "Okay, let's kind of see what we can do with this furniture and get it into that kind of workspace." So we took out the walls, got the cabinets down, so now we have sight lines so you can actually see the people and see the work that they are working on. And we use that, again, this allows for the same number of people, but the space opened up and it enables more conversations, more collaboration, and we were able to take the parts from those cubes and turn them into, we had make little collaboration spaces, workspaces. And the other thing is, by opening up the aisles, we now have spaces to do stand-up. So again, it's stand-up meetings. So it's again, this relationship goes far beyond just the product that we're working on. It really is the way we work that we're now sharing.
So the next thing that we wanted to bring forward is just the idea of facilitation versus dictating. So this is just a snapshot of one of the many workshops that we run. You can see that we've sort of thoughtfully reconstructed the room in terms of taking out the desks, and making it a much more collaborative style. We've got customer snapshots in the background, and so trying to, again, focus on environment, but then also the role of the designer as someone who is not really coming in with an expert opinion, but really the ideal outcome is having a shared vision and clear, actionable next steps in terms of what these conversations produce. And these are things that are fairly actively constructed in terms of working with Fidelity and saying, well, what do we want to get out of this workshop, and what's our goal, and how do we want to bring people along for this conversation?
And I would say too, having worked with a lot of different agencies, the thing that is different here, I think, with the work that we were doing with Effective is that I think the workshops were constructed at, there were Excel spreadsheets with, exactly which decisions needed to be made at certain times. But if you were to walk into the room, you would think it was a cocktail party. But it was it was architected so that the outcome of 50 people was that we all felt good about what we were doing, and we made the decisions, and we were creating the things that we needed to create.
And we weren't just iterating on designs, we're iterating between these meetings on how we're doing the meetings. So how did that go? How was it successful? Next time maybe we need to try this. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. So co-creation and collaboration. Really, I've talked a lot here and used the phrase client agency a lot. And what we've tried to do is just get away from that altogether and realize that we're one team. Yes, we live under different brands, if you will, but we're really trying to create a great product at the end. And so really just the notion of trying to break down those distinctions, those sort of artificial barriers, if you will, and produce great work. Leading by doing. I think this is really, if you want to make a change in customer experience work, you have to roll up your sleeves and dig in. I think really asking yourself, okay, that last hour that we just spent talking about how we wanted to create a better customer experience, what came out of that and what are we actually doing about it? And so the idea here is again, producing artifacts, frameworks, and ways for producing different and new dialogue within the organization, but also doing it in such a way that you're opening the space for other people to participate in that conversation so that everyone's moving the conversation forward together. Having the right people participating. Something that's been really great on this project is that we've continued to invite new people to the table in the context of these workshops. Customer service managers who had never been part of product definition, and they're giving us some really great insight. These people are really on the front lines of what some of the customers are having issues with, and so it was just a great exchange of bringing in new people and new voices. And of course, the challenge from a facilitation perspective is, again, bringing down and having a central point of how you're going to refine that feedback. So back to the notion of frameworks, having something that everyone can point to collectively. Mm-hmm. Don't wait for a meeting. I know this seems fairly obvious, but oftentimes I think we get in the mode of project management and say, okay, well, we've got another review round in 2 weeks, so we'll wait to share it then. And so this is just a shot of Lindsay, one of our design leads, on Skype with Janelle, just having an impromptu session saying, hey, I think we need to talk about this section of work here, and not really waiting till the next design review to address it.
And so, I think having that impromptu conversation happening at all levels of the organization, so the most junior people and the most senior people are, communicating like a family, and not waiting for, the big family event where there might be a big fight.
Right. So the question is, how can we make this sustainable? How can we make sure that this isn't just a one-off thing and that we got lucky? How do we make this permeate throughout the organization, and how do we use this as a methodology for continuing to create better relationships and better customer experiences long term? So flashing back to 2008 and web design agencies and thinking about digital as sort of this one-way sort of brochureware, if you will. A lot of focus was paid on visual design and people setting each other apart on maybe how things looked. And as things have become a lot more complex and the consumer voice has become a lot stronger in a two-way dialogue with brands, there's really become a critical need to focus on problem definition. And I mean that from both sides, really actually between the client and the agency saying, what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve here, and what are the results that we're expecting at the end of this engagement? Again, it's a slight shift, it's a slight nuance, but often we just start diving into the work and not asking ourselves these critical questions. And then the last layer here is really looking at the shift of the role of designer or design intent. And I think oftentimes it's easy to look at design as sort of this specialization in a silo. And I think our belief is that a lot of people, and certainly I've talked with Susie about this quite a bit, with the right intent can take on the mindset of design thinking with proper training, of course, and understanding, but using design as a facilitation tool to get people on the same page. And so it's really less about sort of the designer as expert in creating great deliverables and output, but really looking at the designer and people in the organization as a facilitator and producing the right types of conversations as opposed to producing the right types of artifacts.
And one anecdote there is, Chris and my team and our extended team, we have a 100-person team at Fidelity that focuses on design, and we partner with outside agencies. But we're being asked now in the past year to help reinvent the business. So it's not about creating an interactive experience. It's about, hey, how are we going to reinvent this retirement savings situation? Let's get those designers in here to help us do some of this design facilitation to help make decisions around things. So I think what we're seeing, I think what Peyton is and EffectiveUI is seeing is there's a need, from an agency, and we're seeing it within our own companies, that there's this really deep need for designers to come into the conversation and help the companies reinvent themselves.
So we're about out of time, but really I think that, what we would, ask of all of you as you walk away from the conference is, go back and see if you can implement some of these things. I mean, the hope is that they're not terribly complex in and of themselves, but just having a mindfulness towards thinking more about the way in which work is getting done as opposed to focusing on the work itself. So thanks very much, and we'll just go ahead. I think we have a few minutes just to open it up for any questions you might have. Yeah.
One of the underlying assumptions of this discussion is that clients and agencies want to have a relationship. And I work on the agency side, and one thing I've seen a lot more of is clients coming in and saying, I don't want a relationship with you. I just want you to do this X, Y, and Z and get this done for me. And I'm not really wanting to get to the time it takes to build a relationship and partner. So I'm wondering, if you can provide an insight or some persuasive techniques to help clients understand that there's value in the partnership itself.
I think one of the things we wind up, and this was sort of a clear delineation when people come in here, they're saying, are you looking for staff augmentation or are you looking for a project to be done? And it's like, and I think there's sort of dangers in sort of both those being polarized. And I think the way that as an agency, as I would talk about it, is that even if you want me to do this thing, I can do it so much better if we have a little better understanding, or if we do some of this sort of understanding and research together, because the end result is going to be much better.
I think also part of it too, I mean, I'll be, frank, like I think at the beginning of the relationship with EffectiveUI, I'm managing a lot of things, and I did just want things to get done. Like, so I did need people to just come in and execute. And I think that, so coming in and executing, getting in the door and showing that you can execute. But I think what you guys did very well was that it was surfacing up to us how we could learn and be better. So there was always a conversation about, okay, we get where you're going, and we think you could be doing this. Let's make sure we hit this deliverable and let's keep talking. So I wouldn't say that out the gate we were like, hey, this is great. We have this big happy family, and we're going to live in a house in California. It was tough at the beginning, but I think it was. I don't think that you guys ever gave up your brand. You never gave up your core value, which was that was this service design, this design facilitation. So there's no easy answer, but I think you got to keep at it.
Well, I think it's from as an agency person, I think it's actually raising the question to a potential client who's saying we just want to get work done, and saying, well, tell me about how work gets done at your organization, number one. And number two, how do you typically partner with your agencies? And what is your expectation of us in this engagement? And so even just starting that conversation, I think, that can shed a lot of light. And to be fair, I think there might be some scenarios where that is, maybe a technique where you understand of like, you can assess fit and see like, okay, well, are we going to be successful here? So just raising the level of conversation a little bit, and not just focusing on the output and the work. Yeah.
Actually, you stole my question, but I wanted to no, great, glad to hear it. So how do you work, and how do you work with a client when you have one client which may be interacting with their in-house design department versus working with the business owner of the particular project?
It's a creative director, I can answer.
That's what this relationship.
Yeah, well, and I think I've had to say, had these conversations a couple of times with both in our organization, the same thing, which is on the business side or on the agency side, where it comes in and says, I'm sorry, but it's ultimately, end of the day, guess who's going to get the phone call if something goes out that's either off-brand or doesn't work within our framework? It's like, it's me. So I'm the guy in between that. So it's in my best interest to make sure that we help pull our teams in to those situations and kind of say, I understand that has to work, it has to get done, but let us make sure that those relationships, as independent as are still successful.
I would also add to that, it's like, I think it goes back also to those text messages from Janelle and Lindsay, and different designers. I think it's really important, if there's an internal design